Hey TYT, I'm Nomiki Konst here at the Capitol, right behind the Capitol with Representative Tulsi Gabbard, who needs no introduction to our audience. She has taken a break from voting to come out here on a beautiful day to have a conversation about the state of the Democratic Party. Thank you first for joining us.
Thank you. It's good to talk to you.
Yeah, so we didn't expect, we knew we were going to talk about the Democratic Party today, but we didn't expect to wake up to an article in Politico, which is an excerpt from Donna Brazile's book about the Democratic Party. And boy, did she go there. Now, you've had history. You were a vice chair of the Democratic Party, the Democratic National Committee, DNC. You stepped down and endorsed Bernie Sanders last year during the primary, and you were very vocal about the primary process and some of the reforms. What was your first take when you saw this piece?
I was not surprised to read about what she wrote. I was surprised to see that it had been written about. That's kind of the short answer. You know, I wasn't privy to many of the detailed things that she talked about while I was serving there as vice chair. It was something that, you know, had been spoken about in kind of vague terms that, hey, this is a potential course of action that may be taken, but to have it laid out in such stark, blunt terms, again, I was not surprised that happened, but I was a little bit surprised that it was put out there as it was today.
In the piece, she talked about not knowing about this joint fundraising committee and doing the homework and getting to the bottom of it. Were you surprised to read that somebody who was so much part of the former chairwoman, then became vice chair, and then became the interim chair, were you surprised to read her lack of knowledge about some basic things in the party?
Well, you know, there was, and there were some articles that came out at a certain point about these joint fundraising agreements, and the concern that I had even heard from party chairs at the time that they were essentially being used as a funnel to get funds to the Hillary Clinton campaign. I had talked with some party executive directors and chairs who refused to actually sign on to those agreements because they didn't want to be used in that way. They saw that they would actually not benefit from those agreements. They saw that the grassroots organizations that they were building were not going to benefit from it and didn't want to be used as pawns, essentially. But given the construct of the party leadership at the time that I was there, and Donna was a fellow vice chair, there was not, openness, there was not communication, there was not discussion about a lot of these major issues that she raised with the 5 vice chairs, the executive officers of the DNC at that time.
So I'm, full disclosure, as many people know, I'm on the Reform Commission for the Unity Reform Commission for the DNC, and that was initially our goal here, was to have a conversation about the reforms. You published a video last week that has been getting a lot of attention, talking about some of the dysfunction in the party and lack of transparency and accountability, and you called for specific reforms that do reflect what at least the Bernie Sanders side is we've all united on this, and some other members have united on some of these reforms. What are your top tier issues?
Openness, transparency, and accountability. We talk a lot about wanting people to get more involved in our democracy, the abysmal turnouts in elections, both in state elections and in national elections, and what can we do about this? These are very simple things that we can do to actually increase engagement in our elections overall, and specifically in the Democratic Party. Our party should be the big tent party, the party that welcomes diverse ideas, people who bring different experiences, different stories, different thoughts to the table on a whole host of issues. Unfortunately, what we've seen is there have been more hurdles put in place for people to get involved than actually making it easier. So the 2 things that I've been pushing for actually throughout the last year and the last year's election are very simple: open or same-day registration primaries, so that you don't have situations, as we saw in certain states, where people were not allowed to vote because their names weren't on some roll or list or whatever, and getting rid of superdelegates. I think a lot of people learned a lot about the process during last year's elections when they saw, okay, the superdelegate vote did not match the way that the people of a certain state voted. And so, at that time I was getting calls from people like, wait, how is this democratic? Right. You know, there's been talk, Republicans also have superdelegates in their system, but their superdelegates are bound to follow the votes of the people in those states, much like a democracy should be. So those are two very simple, should not be controversial reforms that we can do at the DNC level and at the local state party levels across the country to open the party up, get more people involved.
And you are a superdelegate as a congresswoman. Yes. And there are other people in Congress who think, you know, of course it's nice to have the superdelegate vote, but you're still elected and you still represent people.
That's right.
And so there is that duty to the people who have elected you. Moving forward, it's hard. I mean, I personally struggle with this, wondering what happens when this commission ends, if we get the amount of reform that we need. If, say, superdelegates are reduced, primaries, there's an urging to have states open up their primaries as much as they can, but some of the party issues, the transparency issues, are not resolved. Do you think that this path forward for the party is a strong path? I mean, the party lost 1,100 seats in 10 years.
The only way to achieve these reforms, the only way to bring about meaningful change in the party is going to come about if people in every state across the country stand up and demand it. The power has been so closely held, you know, within a very few people with their own ideas and their own agenda, that there is, you can understand why there's such a disconnect between the everyday challenges that people are facing in their lives as they look and say, hey, what is this party offering? What are the solutions that you're bringing forward? So when you look at so many states who previously had voted for Democrats, they walked away. They either didn't vote or they voted for the other party. We've got to look at and understand that the answer doesn't lie in the machinery in Washington. The answer lies in getting back out to the core purpose for why these political parties should exist, which is to serve as representation and servants of the people. That's really the goal and the objective, is how do we bring about positive change for the people? And the people can stand up and rise up and demand these reforms in our party. That's the only way that this change is going to come about. It's not going to happen willingly or easily.
Oh, absolutely not. I think there are a lot of people
you know
who
that more than most.
A lot of people have vested interest in keeping the party the way it is. And a lot of them have spoken out against you, and they're now, the light is being shown that you were on the right side of history, and you stood up at a moment when people chattered behind the scenes, but no one was willing to really step up and say, this is wrong, and then support the candidate from the other side. Have there been some olive branches between you and maybe other party members? Have you?
Yeah, you know, look, my focus has never been, well, we've got to pick sides and it's us versus them. My focus has always been on how can we make sure that we're doing the right thing on behalf of the people who whether you're elected or not elected, we all have a role and a stake in this, the people who we actually serve and the people who we represent. So I've had, you know, obviously I'm in touch with a lot of our friends from the Bernie campaign. I'm in touch with people who supported Hillary, and the point is, though, to get rid of kind of the ugliness and the infighting that we saw a lot of last year and that we unfortunately continue to see now, and say, okay, if we're focused on quote-unquote unity, that unity should be around the people and strengthening our democracy, not kind of hankering down and, you know, batting down the hatches and saying, well, we've got to protect ourselves from this change. So that's, to me, the answer is very simple. And if we are loud enough and strong enough and positive in what we're trying to do, staying very focused on that goal and not getting lost in this bickering and infighting, that's a distraction. It actually takes away from the important changes that need to occur.
There are definitely folks who were not Democrats before Bernie Sanders ran, voted as Democrats when Bernie Sanders ran, and many who are now questioning whether or not they should even be part of the Democratic Party. And I think that's an honest question that is, you know, it's not at a great space, at a great place right now. But is there an alternative? I mean, what would you say? You're a Democrat. You're elected as a Democrat. What would you say to people who want to, as they call it, Dem exit?
Look, work towards reform, work towards a positive and constructive path. I'm not going to sit here and tell anyone to stay in the party or to leave the party or choose this or choose that. That's up to every individual to make that choice. But it's important for us to, in all ways, find ways that we can constructively strengthen our democracy. I think that's the most important thing. For people who think, well, I'm just going to leave the party and that's somehow going to solve the problem, it's just not. That in and of itself is not going to solve the problem. Again, I think it's important for us to focus on how we, in our collective way, can actually bring about change. And if anything came out of the 2016 presidential election, it was that I hope people recognized how powerful we really are. Mm-hmm. That a candidate like Bernie Sanders, who, himself later said that he really didn't think he had much of a chance to get very far, became a major contender for the presidential nomination. Not because he was assisted or helped or enabled by any group or individual, but truly through the strength and power of people. So let's harness that same energy, that same positive energy, towards trying to bring about the real changes that we know we need now as we head into the coming elections in the next few years.
I'll take that advice.
All right.
It's wonderful advice. Representative Tulsi Gabbard.
Aloha.
Always a pleasure. Aloha.
Nice to see
Thank you.
Thank you.